Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the table where we are going to have conversations that are accommodated by listening, understanding, and of course, special guests. And so the guest that we have today, Alan, is
Natalia, who is going to be visiting today and has a great question for us. You want to unpack it for everybody?
Yeah. So I'm just curious, your guys' thoughts on how to navigate living well with parents who have different belief systems or different beliefs than I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is a huge question, not just for you. I think it's a really common question, and something that it's definitely worth talking about. As our world has become more globalized, there's just a lot more of that going on. So definitely learning how to not just coexist, but to thrive, right? And be able to live with mutual respect and love. And that's a big subject.
Yeah, even like especially, I think even in this particular moment of where we're at in our history of just, a lot of us are quarantining with families or have been in close contact with people that are very dear to us who during this time have maybe very different beliefs than us about lots of different things.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that can be a very difficult thing. And so your question comes like at a really good time, Natalia. I think so much wisdom in wanting to kind of explore that. It's so easy to kind of just pass that off and be like, my parents, they're just, who cares? They're just being parents,
Yeah.
But really wanting to, like, as a disciple of Jesus, wanting to engage that well, there's a lot of wisdom to even just starting that.
As you said that, it hadn't occurred to me before. I mean, we really liked the question. That's why we wanted you to come on the show. But it's true. It's not just a faith question. It's a politics question. I mean, my gosh, this last year's been catastrophic for a lot of families.
Yeah.
I mean, probably COVID saved a lot of families from catastrophe because they couldn't have Thanksgiving together. They probably should just cancel Thanksgiving during election years, at least for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you think it can be all kinds of, I mean, what happens when someone who graduated from UCLA marries someone from USC? I mean, that could, it's all kinds of
They don't.
They don't. That's right. UCLA people have much better taste than that. But so, okay, you can cut that out.
You should keep that. It's such a big part of our social conversation. But I imagine it has like a personal ring for you. What inspired you to ask that question?
Yeah, so personally in my household, I have parents who do believe in something different than I do. More particularly one of them, but sometimes it's not easy, especially now during quarantine, as you mentioned. And this has been something going on for a couple of years now. I'm just having to like figure out the best way of just like doing life with my own parents and being able to understand like each other is really hard too.
Yep. I thought about a context for the conversation as I was mulling this over, and it comes out of when Paul wrote his letter to the Ephesians. In one part of the letter, he kind of blew up everything everybody knew about relationships in first century Rome. And in chapter 5 and again chapter 6, he starts out that section by saying, okay, submit to one another, right? In love of God. And he talks about, from there, he goes to the three main social relationships in the Roman Empire. Right? He talks about husbands and wives. He talks about parents and children. And he talks about masters and slaves, which could also, you could apply to rulers and the rest of the Roman Empire, because it was a very similar kind of thing as masters and slaves. And the key phrase is that term, submit to one another, because in the Roman Empire, wives submitted to husbands, children submitted to parents, slaves submitted to masters, but in all of these relationships, he's saying, no, if you're a follower of Jesus, you are both submitting to each other. And in the parental part, he frames it in, okay, children, obey your parents. That's how children submit to parents. But then he says, parents, don't provoke your children. Right?
But admonish them and teach them.
And so there is this mutual submission that's going on. And I don't know if that gives you any thoughts about navigating that, just in a general sense, not only in your home, but does that give you any hooks to hang some thoughts on?
Yeah, I think part of it is like having to be patient with it. And the part of like not provoking, I guess, each other is like such a hard thing to do when it's, especially like if you are younger, like it being not as a teenager anymore, but wanting to just say like, no, like say no and not give in to whatever they want me to do or follow whatever they ask me to do is such like, it feels like it's easier to say that than do what I've been asked.
Right.
And so having to be like, hold my tongue a little bit or just like, just do it, just do whatever you're asked and like obey, submitting to your parents, as you said, is something that like I've had to learn over several like many years. And it's not like it's not like the normal thing to do, I'd say.
Yeah.
Or I guess a fully natural thing that most teenagers or just younger people do anyways, like with their parents.
What would you say is?
Just like not following it, or just say like no, like I'm not going to do that, or coming with even a different attitude.
Right.
It's
like that joke. I don't know if you've ever heard this joke, but this mother's trying to get her kid to sit in the high chair, and the kid is just staying. You heard this?
I think so.
Yeah, and the kid just refuses to sit down, and finally, she plants this kid in the chair, and the child says, I may be sitting down on the outside, but I'm standing up on the inside, right?
Yeah.
You probably have had some of those moments.
I'm living that. I'm living that joke. My life is a joke. Right? My daughter's just like that.
Yeah, so I guess my question back to you out of that joke is a real question. What does it look like not to be just sitting down on the outside, but how do you sit down on the inside, but in a way that doesn't violate your sense of self? Because I think that maybe that's the key dilemma here, right? How do I do this in a way that I'm honoring my parents, but I'm not bearing who I am? Is that a fair?
Yeah, definitely. That's a good question.
I actually hadn't thought about that part of like, there's part of you is on the line. And as we grow older, we're trying to learn who we are and assert, this is who I am. And so, it's almost like there is a kind of a fight over not just, am I going to do it? There's a much bigger conversation.
An identity.
Yeah, an identity thing. Like,
right.
I'm not acquiescing to everybody's beliefs about who I should be. So how do I do that?
Yeah, I think I'm still learning that. But what it comes to mind is having to just like, I think valuing myself and what I believe is super important. But also if I know in the moment, it's not like I'm sacrificing myself, but I have to give something, like almost like a compromise to maybe keep the peace in the moment, or maybe having a conversation of like, this is my way of showing respect to you, and actually saying like, I hear you, this is what I feel, because sharing your emotions can be really important too in that sense. How like what you believe or what you say makes me feel a certain way, and like sharing that can that
can be really big.
Yeah, it almost opens the eyes to both sides too.
Right.
That's
I think,
really good.
Yeah, and and also like sometimes you just have to give a little bit to like then later be able to have something good, like more of like a good conversation, like in the moment, just like being head and heated and just maybe exploding is not what's going to help the situation. And so something later could be like, I'm sorry, or being this way, or sorry for maybe saying that or acting this way, could always be something helpful in the end as well.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to give up my own independence or like leave that, because that's important too. And that's what I'm learning a lot, especially during quarantine, where a lot of things get mixed. Just being in the same household with the same people, and just having your own I guess valuing and taking the time to just like experience what you value, I think, and just kind of set that tone for yourself, but also like setting the bar, like this is, if we get to past this conversation where it's like, ooh, that's attacking me or that's attacking the other person, that's where I think I have to step back a little bit. And just kind of be.
You just prompted, sorry to interrupt, but you just prompted a really big question for me. Because in our last episode, Barbara, my wife, was here and talking about listening. And the question that your comment prompts for me is, have you ever been able to have a conversation where where it wasn't about imposition of wills, right? That you're going to do this. No, I'm not going to do that. But where you could just say, so let's take the who's going to do what off the table and tell me why your beliefs are so important to you. And then, that, I don't know if that would or not, invite the return question. Okay, when they're done, to have the opportunity to share what you value. I mean, have you ever had the opportunity to do that, or do you think that's something that might work?
I don't think I've had that well, I do remember one moment where I've had to be able to ask just like a question, like, or just to be able to hear like what they believe. And I've just sat and had to listen, as Barb said before, talking about that, just listen and actively listen. I don't remember asking any questions, but just like taking it in and like, okay, I get it. Like, I understand like where you're coming from now. And I think that being able to understand like what they say helps me to kind of almost love on that person in a way. And just be respectful to not like, and if like what they believe, I'm going to respect that and not belittle it or just like crush it and say like, no, that's like not cool at all. Or I like to be respectful about it and just be like, okay, I'm going to take this in as something that you value as much as like something that I would value. Like, I try to look at it as my perspective of like, if I'm telling you, where I got the chance to say like a little bit of how I like what I believe. At the time, I wasn't fully aware of all the things that I believed before. But just the little pieces that I got to share and they listened back was helpful to be able to do.
So it sounds like you're saying, like, if you give some, you're going to get a little bit of what you give. And if that's
well said.
Provocation, you're probably going to get some of that. But if it's listening and respect, it sounds like you're sowing to get that back. And that you have before. Which, that's, when you think about relationships, obviously there's a past, there's like a chronological history to them and many offenses over many years. And sometimes it's hard to say, okay, I'm going to stop and do the opposite thing to be the first peacemaker and go and give them what I want. But it makes me think of what Jesus said about how all the law and the prophets are fulfilled in doing unto us as you would have them do unto you.
Boom.
Just giving people that, hey, I want to be heard and I want to be understood right now. I'm totally probably not going to be, but I'm going to listen to you. And so that, like, so what you said would come later, maybe as a result of doing that, coming for full circle, there's some benefit. And your parents do realize, oh, my kid isn't just being contrarian because it's cool. She's has her own thoughts and they're valid. They're really, she thinks I do too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that's what I'm spotting from your story.
Yeah.
A little bit, which sounds good to me.
I really like that application of what we call the golden rule, right? It's like a lot of times you've probably experienced this. A lot of times we've wanted or even demanded of someone that they give us what we want, but we haven't given them what we would want if we were in their shoes.
Right.
And
understand me.
Yeah.
We want to be understood.
Oh,
that's
right.
Right.
Oh, we all do. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. And I think this is a time where people feel almost as if there's on the periphery, there's a lot of voices they know will disagree with them. And they almost anticipate being misunderstood.
Mm-hmm.
People get very entrenched in their way of thinking and articulating it to a point where almost it's hard to open that door. But I think if we were to do what we just talked about in terms of giving that and not even expecting it back, but hoping that it would come back to us, I think that really can open a door that's really be firmly shut.
Yeah.
And pave the way for relationships, even with people that are very different in what they believe from us, especially people who are very different in what they believe from us.
This isn't exactly a church history example, but there is a great example from recent history, fairly recent, back in so Egypt and Israel had the 73 war, and it ended in kind of a stalemate, and things were kind of just stuck. And the president of Egypt, Anwar Sadat, got on a plane and said, "I'm flying to Tel Aviv." And he just, which was insane, right? I mean, they've just had this major war. He gets on the plane and he flies to Tel Aviv, gets off. He's welcomed at the airport by the Israeli prime minister, and they walk off and they talk. And that's what led to the peace accords and peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, and really changed the nature of, it didn't fix everything,
right,
but it showed that there could be a conversation. Now years later, we're seeing more of those kinds of conversations. But the drama of Sadat getting on this plane with no guarantees of what was going to be on the receiving end of that. They could have shot him out of the sky. Because he had just gotten to war with them. But his extra mile step into the Israeli world to say, I'm here to talk, I'm here to listen, completely changed the nature of that relationship. It can be done.
Yeah.
It can. And that was political rather than a religious issue, but
if they can do it.
Well. If they can do it, anybody
I'm sure.
can do it.
Yeah, but there are other examples, I think, too.
Right.
And one that is pertinent to mention is Jesus didn't exactly jive with his parents all the time.
That's true.
And that doesn't mean that he was, let's, remove everything from that conversation about all of our preloaded assumptions, but and explaining that not jiving. But if Jesus is who he says he is, he's the Son of God, and he's actually innocent, he's perfect. If he didn't jive with his parents, it means that we're all going to have these kinds of hard conversations. And while they both espouse belief in the God of Israel, it's clear that Jesus had a different understanding at some points.
I wouldn't go that far.
Maybe not that far, but I think there were moments
but they didn't understand his ministry.
Yeah. And that led to lots of problems later on when they were like, he's insane, let's go get him, And it's just comforting to know that at least Jesus has gone before us in that as children, in a way, and can show us therefore what it looks like
Yeah.
to be respectful and honest, but
Yep.
still truthful to what we believe and not compromise on what we believe. That was what my thought was.
That's good.
Yeah. But I wanted to return to one last thing that you were saying, Natalia, and I think this was really big. Not belittling what
Yeah.
someone believes.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we understand in order to belittle when we get, and it hurts more than when we're just, I don't want to hear what you have to say. And it's so common now to do that, at least on all the conversations we're seeing in public. That's a very common thing to do.
Yeah.
Um,
Scorning and mocking.
Yeah.
They become the
exactly right.
currency of conversation in a public space.
Right. Yeah. And I think what you said before, when we were talking before this, what you said struck me as really wise was you said, I know that what my parent believes is very different from me in some respects. It's difficult for me, but I never choose to belittle that person for that. And I thought, wow, if just people would practice that.
Yeah.
Think about the atmosphere that could be created for resolution and for peacemaking. I think that that's a big, big part of this conversation. I think you have some of your own answers to this question, which you've already shared in a way. And that's a big one. Just not belittling people. Even if you think, oh man, Uncle Rico's off his rocker, man. I don't know what you're talking about, dude. At the next Thanksgiving dinner.
Yep.
It's one thing to say that in your heart, and it's another thing to act that way. And boy, acting that out doesn't make Uncle Rico any easier to relate to.
Yeah.
There's Proverbs 15:1 says, "A soft word turns away wrath; grievous words stir up anger."
Yes,
and that's I've tried to keep that in my brain all the time, because there's so many times that when somebody kind of throws something at us, and the first instinct is to come back at them, and yet if you can respond with grace, often it does totally diffuse the conflict.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I mean, you put that together with doing to others as you have others do to you, and you really do. I mean, does that sound like usable tools in conversation?
Yeah, it does. I think because in what you said, like coming back to me, of like not belittling, but also like it reminds me a little bit of what Barb was saying of like, because you get to like talk to that person and like listen to what they say, now you get to know how to love them a little bit better. And so instead of like having this negative, like, oh, like I don't care what you believe, or that's bogus, or just like not wanting to be in that place, in that spot with them, probably it makes it a little bit easier. Just like, okay, now I know how to maybe like be a better daughter, or just like not necessarily be a better daughter, but like in different situations where like I don't know what to do with this heated moment. Like, okay,
I think we can use the L word here, right? It's you love them better.
Yeah.
And in loving them, you don't have to surrender yourself. It's not about surrender. This is a new aha thought for me. But when we choose to love, we kind of move the whole dynamic. It's no longer about whose will is going to dominate. It's I'm going to love you, and I am not pulling out of this relationship. I'm here,
leaning forward into it,
leaning into it. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'll use that.
No, thank you for this has been a really insightful conversation.
Yeah.
And it only happens because we are bold enough to ask questions and open up the opportunity to discuss them. The insights that are totally genuine from this conversation are going to leave with us as we go back into our lives as fathers, mothers, husbands, grandparents, and friends. And so, thank you for coming. And we want to encourage more conversations like this. And so,
absolutely.
If something that we talked about today really sparked your interest, or maybe like how it did for us, gave you some more insightful ideas or things to think about, drop us a comment or email us. We'd love to hear what you're thinking about as we kind of look at these topics about listening, understanding, and being peacemakers in a world that's totally turned upside down.
Absolutely.
And so we'd love to hear from you, and we look forward to having you at the table. If you'd ever like to come, there's a seat for you.
Yes. Thanks, Natalia.
Yeah,
This
thank
was
you guys.
great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye.